A lot of people think that the Oxford Farming Conference is a bunch of old suits blowing smoke up each other's arse. But when you dig deeper, there were some fantastic conversations about the future of agriculture, both here in the UK and abroad. So here are my top 5 takeaways from the Oxford Farming Conference 2023. One is that the food supply chain in this country is fundamentally broken. This was one of the big takeaways from the Oxford Farming Conference report for 2022, which looks at fairness and cost sharing across the food supply chain to ensure that we are fed in a sustainable way, both in terms of the environment and also for business bottom line. We should not be selling or producing into a system that drives us further into debt. That is not sustainable, and it makes no material sense, both in terms of the environment but also for the business as well. You can see this with egg farmers at the minute who are taking a step back from production because the numbers just don't stack up. Now, you might argue with me and say, well, Sandy, I could have told you that 20 years ago and the system's absolutely buggered. But with the importance of being placed on natural capital now, the tides are just beginning to shift ever so slightly, which makes farmers have slightly more power than what they may realise, which brings me on to my second point. If you're sad enough like me to read books like Competitive Strategy, then you don't need me to tell you how much power the UK supermarkets have over the supply chain and the producers. And whilst in the past, farmers and producers have been treated like shit, change is coming. This has predominantly been driven by carbon emissions and natural capital, and it's coming from 2 places. One is government, who are putting increasing pressure on big companies and all companies to be accountable and more responsible for their carbon emissions. But 2, it's coming from the consumer, who are looking for more information and they want to know what they're eating and what impact that food is having on the environment. The big supermarkets are looking at the supply chain to see how they can offset a lot of these emissions, and they're turning to farmers in a bid to do so. So the relationship is not solely a transactional one, which can only be good for the producer and for the farmer, but it'll be up to us to determine how we use that power to our advantage. Number 3 is the growing demand for land here in the UK. This topic is about as old as your dead grandmother, but increasing pressure from government meant that it formed a large part of the discussion at this year's conference. In a world where there's increasing demands from the land, how do we farm sustainably for the environment, for society in terms of food production, but also for our own business bottom line? The world population is expected to increase for another 50 years, so the demand for food is going to increase for the next 50 years, but the climate crisis is happening now and needs solved now. So how do we do this in a sustainable way that makes it fair and pay for farmers? The introduction of the land use framework plus the development of elms, although glacial, will go some way in helping this, but we need a cultural change and we need political bravery if we're going to come to a consensus on land use here in the UK. Number 4 is the need for a framework around natural capital. This is one of the biggest buzzwords in the industry at the minute, and given how immature the market is, it is an absolute wild west out there, and quite frankly, no one has a bloody clue what is going on. As one of the speakers at the conference put it, we're in the very, very early stages of a carbon market, but it is going to take off and it is going to kick in a big way. And this is driven predominantly by the government, who are putting a lot of pressure and increased pressure on companies to become more responsible and more accountable for their carbon emissions. And that can only put farmers in a strong position going forward. This puts farmers and landowners in a great position to capitalise, but we need a framework to sort all of this nonsense out. We need a lot more scientific data to back up our thinking, and we also need a regulatory baseline to determine the scope of this market. It is coming, but we're not there quite yet. And number 5 is culture change and getting started. The question of what does it mean to be a farmer in 2023 came up quite a few times at the conference this year, and we need to move away from this traditional image that was crystallised after and during the Second World War, in where farmers were just about food production. We need to move to a more modern image where it encompasses environment, sustainability, food production, and everything else that we do in 2023 and going forward. If we sit back and wait for government or wait for every single detail to be absolutely perfect, like in the case of the carbon market, then things are never going to happen. We need a degree of bravery to take the first step and get started on this journey ourselves. So there you have it. They're my top 5 takeaways from the Oxford Farming Conference in 2023. A couple of things. I didn't actually attend in person. I got one of their digital tickets. I think the in-person tickets were 350 quid this year. I paid 70 quid to be able to dial in online and listen to everything from my computer here. I think it definitely is a force for good for the industry. Once you get by all the corporate bullshit and the general shithoosery that tends to surround a lot of these events, it is a very good event. The discussions were fantastic, the speakers were great, and it definitely is a force for good in the industry.